If you've ever been fooled by a really good liar, you're not alone. Most of us have. In fact, most of us get fooled all the time. And by definition, we don't even realize it. We get manipulated, we get cajoled, coaxed. Sometimes we know and we don't care. Sometimes we know and we think that we're smarter than the person that's trying to manipulate us, so it doesn't matter. Or maybe it even perceivably gives them an edge that they don't really have. But while all those things have a degree of truth to them, the real truth lies in listening. And that's today's guest. His name is Michael Reddington. Michael is a certified forensic interviewer. He unlocks reality. When I first met him, he said, "John, I never try to catch people in a lie. I just try to catch them in the truth." And I thought, God, that is so interesting. So we invited him on today. He has a great book out. It's called The Disciplined Listening Method. It's out right now. You can find it on Amazon and a million other places, I'm sure. Michael, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. It's great to see you.
I could not stop putting your book down. I couldn't put your book down. And I couldn't stop putting your book down. I kept putting it down every 2 minutes with my ADD. No. It seemed like almost any page I turned to, I usually will skim a book, read something for, a few paragraphs, get bored, move on to something else. But every time I pulled up anything in your book, I kept wanting to read it more and more and more and realize just how impactful this is to anyone, not just people trying to catch liars, but just trying to be a better person and communicate better. What was your reason for writing this book to begin with?
That might be a 30-minute conversation in and of itself. First of all, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. For me, when people hear that my background is interview and interrogation, their first reaction appears to be flashing to whatever they've seen on TV, whatever Hollywood has told them. And while that makes for fantastic drama, they might be underwhelmed if they saw or experienced how it often just feels like a normal conversation. Just two people establishing rapport, making a connection, and how important it is to help people save face in order for them to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. So for me, I felt like the more research I did across the spectrum of business communication and interview and interrogation, there was this canyon between the two that in my mind just needed to be filled. That if we could find a way to bridge the gap and bring all of these research and best practices together, to your point, we wouldn't be teaching people how to catch liars. We could give people a resource to help them literally improve how they engage, to help them improve their situational awareness and start creating results in relationships that previously appeared unattainable or at least unlikely.
In your book, you write, the worst thing you can do when you think someone is lying as a listener is to just call them out and call them a liar. How come?
Nobody likes being called a liar. Scientifically, that was proven by Norman Anderson, who had his research population rate how 555 personality trait words would make them feel. 555 might have been too many, but he didn't ask my opinion, nor should he have, honestly. But at the end of that, literally the word that came in ranked 555th was the word liar. And if I've got my numbers correct, I believe 6 of the bottom 10 were some derivation of dishonest, and 4 of the top 10 were some derivation of honest. We all love to be thought of as honest. And for people, especially here in the North Carolina area who are familiar with Dan Ariely's research, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty was one of his books. And in there, I'm obviously paraphrasing him significantly, but essentially one of his key things is that we're all capable of quote unquote dishonesty to the degree that we can rationalize it within our self-image. So when we get back to lying, and now I'll quote some of Tim Levine's research, see how many name drops I can get in the first 5 minutes here for you. But his research, Tim Levine's research, is really clear that the majority of the time, people don't lie to hurt you. They lie to protect themselves. So they likely have some sort of motivation, some sort of rationalization. They've lined it up within their self-image, and there's either a consequence they're looking to avoid and or a benefit they're looking to achieve. So if we call them out on being a liar, we're literally forcing themselves to defend being called, like having their self-image violated, being called the one thing that they've rationalized themselves against. So it ends up creating far more resistance because before they can engage in the conversation, their immediate knee-jerk reaction is to say, "Oh, I'm not a liar."
Yeah, I could see that. And I guess they could find a way to justify it to some degree.
Easily.
And my wife asked me this morning, she goes, "I got a question you need to ask him." She said, "Someone once told me that people lie 100 times a day. Ask them if that's true." And I thought, Oh yeah, I've heard that too. Is there any truth to that, or is that just depending on how you define what a lie is?
I'm trying to remember which university that research study came from, and you just hit a very great point with the last sentence there. How do we define what a lie is?
Yeah.
So the research around dishonesty, to me, because I'm a nerd and I come from interview and interrogation, is utterly fascinating. So and I'm probably going to forget the universities that some of these came from, so I'll try not to embarrass myself. But there was one study that said, like, on average, an adult can't go 10 minutes without telling a lie, or on average they tell 1.5 lies per conversation. And then on the average adult, I can't remember I think it was they hear 100 lies a day, not that they tell 100 lies a day.
Okay.
So I think that research study said we hear 100 lies a day. But what do you like? What's your average interaction? What do you do with people? So if you're somebody that has a relatively individualized or solitary job and you hear 100 lies a day, what are you telling yourself?
Right.
If you're a judge, if you are an investigator, if you're an insurance agent, now you might be hearing more than 100 lies a day, depending on who you're talking to and the context of the situation. But to your point, the bigger question becomes, how do you define a lie? There's an interesting research study out of, I believe it came from England. But again, if anybody's interested, I can backstop and get you the documents. But it found that, believe it or not, altruistic lies breed trust.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Because if we're lying in a way that puts ourselves in the negative position in order to help somebody else, it increases the perception of our trustworthiness. So when you think about the spectrum of lies, from white lies to your self-serving criminal lies, there's a wide spectrum. And there's 5 categories of lies that I typically file them into. The first type of lie would be a denial. Somebody did something and they say, I didn't do it. Now, on the record, innocent people should be denying things they didn't do. But if we're just going to talk about lies, the I didn't do it could be a lie. The second one is the lie of omission. People essentially tell you the truth and they leave out that one little piece they didn't want you to know, which again stays really in line with the research. In fact, this is arguably the most common type of lie we run into. People will tell the truth until the second the truth becomes problematic. Then they'll skirt just far enough away for as long as they have to. Then they'll come back to the truth.
So if I told you I graduated 4th in my class, but I didn't tell you there was only 5 people in my class, I didn't tell a lie per se, but I deliberately led you to perceive or believe that I was smarter than a lot more people than I really was.
You framed it in a way to create the impression you were looking for.
Yeah. And the other thing you said earlier too about self-deprecation as a lie to make people feel more comfortable. I mean, every so often someone will say something like, you're smart, and I'll say, yeah, that's my C+ average. I didn't have a C+ average, but just saying that, they'll say that immediately. I think to your point, you see the vulnerability or the tension just kind of go away of, oh, well, I'm smarter than this guy. Yeah. And they just start talking, Yeah. And then there's the ones too, I think, I thought after my wife said it this morning, I thought, okay, let's see how many people lie to me today or how many people I lie to. And in my mind, I'm going 0. I'm not going to lie to anybody today. What do I have to lie about? Right. And then I go to McDonald's and the guy says, how are you today? And I'm having a bad day. And I say, fine, thank you. How are you? And he says, real disgruntled, fine also. And I'm thinking he's not having a great day and I'm not having a great day, but what are you going to say to the stranger who asks you how you're doing today? So I guess that would be considered a lie, right?
Technically, I get a kick when I'm working with a group of people and somebody says, I've never told a lie. I'm not a liar. Okay. I'll go with you're not a liar because that doesn't fall within your self-image. And I will certainly go with that you take this hypothetical you as an individual. This person makes an intentional effort to stick to the truth as often as possible. But I'm also willing to bet that if we put a recorder on that person, to your point, how many socially polite lies do they tell a day? More often than not, we avoid the truth, massage the truth, manipulate the truth, whatever phrase you want to put to it, to avoid a consequence that's real or perceived. So you go to get coffee this morning, kind of having a rough morning, and somebody says, hey man, how you doing? we literally create consequences for ourselves and honestly, potentially that other person if we answer honestly. Right. You know what? I've actually had a really tough day. I slept through my alarm. My son wasn't cooperative this morning. My wife was upset because I didn't do what I normally do in the morning. Then I got stuck in traffic. Honestly, I'm worried I'm going to have a really bad day. I'm hoping this coffee is going to pick me up. Like, no, there's the consequence of vulnerability. There's a consequence of violating social norms. There's the consequence that this guy might actually engage with you, and 6 minutes later you're talking to him and you just want your coffee. Right. So to just be polite. Say, yeah, man, I'm having a great day.
Yeah.
So again, for me, and it kind of gets back to what you said, whether somebody's lying by omission or fabrication, or they're exaggerating, or they're minimizing, or they're denying, whatever it is, the fact that somebody is lying isn't nearly as important as what they're either trying to avoid or achieve in the context of the situation.
So let's talk about some things a little bit more serious. George Santos is in the news a lot. He's not the only politician that lies. I make the argument that, to your point, probably a lot of them, if not almost all of them, do on a regular basis. But he really took it to the extent. How come nobody spotted that? Or did they, and they just let it go?
My honest opinion is one of two things. One, you just hit on. They may have and just let it go. And the second is, and I'm not a political expert, there's plenty of details of this story that I'm not aware of. Yeah. So from my limited perspective, one man's opinion, they weren't incentivized to catch it. Pick a political party, any political party. Mm-hmm. They are incentivized to fill as many seats with people from their party to maintain power and control for their party and their agenda, so on and so forth. So if you've got somebody who can win or can help you achieve that goal, you're likely not incentivized to pick apart the lie. If anybody is a nerd like me and likes diving into research, Timothy Levine is currently out of the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He's been with a handful of universities in his career. He has a book called Duped. But if you want to dive into the research behind truth and deception, there's no better place to go than that book, in my opinion. And one of Tim's core research findings is truth bias. That essentially we are all biased towards hearing the truth, that we walk around every day essentially ready to believe that what we're hearing all the time is true. The cognitive effort that it would take to just walk around suspicious all the time is unproductive. It's painful. It would hurt relationships. It would stop us from achieving so many different things. So most of us need some sort of event or awareness to get kicked out of this truth bias. So you mentioned interviewing. If you have a hiring manager that looks at somebody's resume and they're like, wow, this candidate is perfect, they could literally be setting themselves up just to believe everything that candidate says and not to ask hard follow-up questions and not to do their due diligence and check references and give them experiential elements to prove what they're doing because they're just ready to buy it. So going into a situation and thinking to myself, okay, I'm engaging with somebody in this given situation who I'm not saying they're bad or they're manipulative or they're going to lie to me, but statistically speaking, this is a situation where somebody might be more likely to choose to manipulate the narrative to their advantage. Therefore, I should probably turn my radar on a little bit and start looking for indications that their emotions are changing, their delivery is changing, and there might be more to the story. So I say all of that to finally get back to the question you asked, which in this situation, anybody that might have been in a position to fact check, that might have been in a position to interview, that might have been in a scenario where they could have identified this earlier on, either A, maybe they weren't incentivized to, so they didn't care, it wasn't at the top of their radar, or B, they were in that truth bias, they already had expectations, they already had an idea of where this was going, and because of that, didn't have the situational awareness to say, wait a minute, maybe I should check up on this.
One of my favorite movies is The Big Short. And the premise of the movie basically is it's kind of like a docudrama in the sense that it kind of recaps the 2009 financial crisis, and they go through it, and Steve Carell and a lot of other big names are in there, and they go through the whole process of how the reason why, you know, a cashier was able to buy $1 million home, it wasn't because, you know, she was such a good liar or did such a good job forging documents. It was because everyone that involved in that process was incentivized to make sure that she was able to buy that home.
Yes.
From the mortgage person to the realtor to the selling realtor to the finance to everybody else. And even though it was very, very obvious that a person who runs a cash register does not earn $1 million a year, it went through the so-called checks and balances, right? Even the people that are supposed to double check, like the underwriters and things too, you know, they were incentivized by how many loans they could write, not how many people they could catch, you know, and cancel out their loan. And you watch that and you think, boy, there's a lot of professions like that today, aren't there? I ask people, I've asked you this before, and you give me a great answer. You know, we've all heard the what I thought was facts. I guess it turned out to be somewhat mythical, that people who talk fast or scratch their nose or rub their eyes or whatever, when you ask them questions, that's how you can, or they don't look you in the eye, or they're, you know, squeamish or something, then that's just a dead ringer for someone. I wouldn't, you know, we've all heard my grandparents, I would never trust anyone who doesn't look you in the eye. And I thought, oh, okay. Why? Well, wouldn't a good liar know how to do those things? And you gave me a great answer for that, which I always wondered, because I felt like I always had conflicting information. What is the deal with that? Is there truth to that? You put your hands in front of your mouth or you scratch your eyes. Does that mean you're not being honest?
Not necessarily, no. And that's me trying to be very polite about the answer.
Good.
So from a scientific standpoint, and I'm not a scientist, but when you go to the preponderance of research, there is no single behavior that's consistently indicative of truth or deception. It does not exist. If I recall correctly, the one behavior from a body language standpoint that closely correlates with deception, or I shouldn't say more closely correlates with deception, is dilating pupils. And if you and I want to sit at each other and stare close enough for an hour, staring at each other's pupils to see if they move, that might become an uncomfortable conversation and create some other behaviors along the way.
What causes people to dilate?
Now you're asking me a question that's a bit above my pay grade, but it's going to be driven by an emotional shift.
Okay.
And that's what these other behaviors are driven by. So when you look at the myths, the number one myth, Charles Bond did 2 research studies globally. And if I recall correctly, he had something like 70,000 participants from 200 countries. Double check those numbers, but it was a significant global research study. The number one deception myth globally is people break eye contact when they lie, regardless of culture. So you would think maybe in some Eastern cultures where eye contact is far less prevalent and culturally frowned upon in some situations.
Right.
Even in those areas,
right,
it is still the number one myth associated with deception.
So the thing about the people who look down and to their left, and and of course now when you see someone do that, you're like, uh-oh, yeah, he's lying to me about where he wants to go for lunch. No.
So essentially, I'm going to speak in some broad brushes here. Mm-hmm. Forgive me. Essentially, nearly all of the behaviors that have been correlated with deception are actually indicative of emotional shifts.
Gotcha.
So I know you have, we all have. If you've been in a conversation, watch somebody's behavior change and thought to yourself, wow, they just lied to me. What you really recognized was they just became uncomfortable. And in the context of the situation at that moment, based on the person, the conversation, everything else, the most likely reason why they just became uncomfortable was that they were lying to you.
Gotcha.
But they could show that exact same behavior after another stimulus made them uncomfortable for another reason. So we like to say that when a behavior changes is more important than what behavior changes, because individually, how you react under stress is going to be different than how I react under stress. And how you or I react under stress is going to change based on who are we talking to, what's the stress, what's the environment we're in, what's the perceived consequences. You know, all of these things are going to impact how that behavior changes. So we're really looking for when does the behavior change, not what behavior changes. And we're also looking for multiple behaviors to shift at the same time. So back when I used to teach interrogation and had videos of our interrogations that we could show during our seminars, sometimes people, one of my favorites was one of my former teammates was interrogating a guy who was suspected of expense fraud. And by the end of the conversation, admitted to what we could document was over $250,000 worth of expense fraud, sending in receipts for trips he never took to China and Brazil and all these other places. And so my friend Chris does a great job with the interrogation, throws out his first accusation after they spent some time together and built some rapport. And as soon as they do, the suspect crosses his arms. And literally when I would show that video, I'd keep my finger on the pause button on the remote. Because like Pavlov's dog, as soon as he crosses his arms every week, nearly every week, someone would say he's defensive, you just lost him. And because I'm also a New Englander, by sarcasm is overwhelming, I would typically look at them and say, do you have your wallet on you? And then I would hit play and he confesses immediately after crossing his arms. What they realized or didn't realize was because they were so focused on his arms crossing, they missed the giant exhale. They missed his shoulders coming down a little bit, and they missed him taking both his feet from being pent up on his toes under the chair to coming flat foot in front of him. Context is king. I don't know how to say it more succinct than that.
That's everything.
When and how a behavior changes within the context of the situation is extremely important.
How accurate are lie detector polygraphs and stuff?
The polygraph exam, I didn't work. I'm not a licensed polygrapher. I've worked for several, so people can count that into their answer. The polygraph exam, although it's called a lie detector, which is a wicked catchy name, is not actually built to detect lies. It's built to detect emotional variances from somebody's established baseline. So a good polygrapher is going to establish what does a truthful baseline look for this conversation, taking into effect that you just being in this room and strapped to this machine is going to make you look nervous. So I've got to factor that into what a truthful answer is. Now I'm going to look for changes from that baseline. So for as popular as machine learning and AI is right now, people in that industry know that the machine is only as good as the information that is fed. So from one man's opinion, again, the accuracy of a polygraph has very little to do with the machine and nearly everything to do with the skill of the polygrapher. So I don't recall off the top of my head, is it 5, is it 7 different things that polygraphs can measure? And honestly, the technology may have changed since the last time I was close to one. But they can measure your blood pressure, your breath rate, your heart rate, changes in the complexion or the texture of your skin, movement in the chair. There's lots of different things that they're measuring all at once. So from a computer standpoint, I would never be able to measure all of those things just looking at you. I have to have a conversation and be simultaneously aware of what I'm saying and doing and what you're saying and doing in a different set of ways. But if you've got a very skilled polygrapher, I would contend that polygraph exam result's going to be dead nuts. If you've got a polygrapher that is not as skilled, that is struggling, that's not as confident, then now you might want to flip a coin. So it's less the machine and more the individual operating the machine.
Interesting.
Paul Ekman refers to this as either the thorough error or the Brokaw hazard, essentially stating that honest people can look really nervous because they're nervous discussing the truth for any number of reasons. Dishonest people can look really calm and composed for any number of reasons while they are being dishonest. So if all we're doing is judging somebody's comfort level in order to decide their guilt or innocence, truth or dishonesty, then we're selling them short, we're selling ourselves short, and we're creating a whole lot of potential error.
So if someone believes something that's not true, if I truly believed I was abducted by aliens and you're like, let's take a polygraph, John, I think you're making that up. And I take the polygraph, but in my mind, I truly believe it, I would pass that polygraph.
I would say
right?
so.
Yeah.
And it would be a combination of, do you truly believe it?
Yep.
How well have you practiced it?
Ah.
And how confident are you that I can detect it?
Oh, right. So let's talk about relationships. Some people listening right now may be in a relationship and they're wondering about their spouse or partner or maybe their parents or somebody, doing something they're not supposed to be doing. Is there a way to, without snooping on their phone or something, to kind of get an idea if they're being truthful?
Yes, I do believe so. And it starts with helping them save face. The biggest mistake that I see time and time and time again, especially in personal relationships, is a situation will reach the boiling point, the point of frustration, and then we confront somebody in a way that backs them into a corner and they feel like they have to save face, they have to protect their self-image. So they end up becoming defensive based on the approach that we took. The harder you have to rationalize a decision, the more obvious the right decision becomes.
That's a great soundbite right there.
And so many times in family scenarios, we get caught with, I love you so much, why can't you understand this? I can see this from where I'm sitting, why can't you see this? You have so much potential, you're causing so much pain. And we talk to people in a way that is parental. Yeah. We talk to them in a way that causes them to feel the need to defend themselves. Short, simple story. My son is 5. He's been flying with us since he was an infant. We were going up to Boston to visit my family. On the flight home, he's acting on the plane how I want to act, like get me off this plane.
Yeah.
My wife had him for a little while. She passes him off to me. Kicking the seats, being fussy, whatever. Every toddler has done this in the history of time. I know adults that do it. So what are my options? Yell at him and tell him to sit still? How long do you think that's going to last? So instead, I look at him and I was like, hey, Gabe, yeah, Daddy, you know how when I go to work, I have to take these planes. I know, Daddy. Do you know how I feel when I'm on a plane for a long time? No, Daddy. Tired, hungry, my back hurts, my knees hurt, get real impatient. And really all I want to do is get off this plane. If they gave me a parachute, I might DB Cooper it out of here. He obviously didn't get that joke. And I looked at him, I said, so let me ask you, are you hungry or tired? And he said, Daddy, can I have a snack? And I said, yes. And after your snack, would you like to take a nap? And he looked at the armrest. And when I pulled it up, he said, yes. He had his little bar, put his head on my lap, slept the rest of the flight.
Wow.
So all too often, we take this problem-focused approach instead of a solution-focused approach, especially in our family conversations. And if we just stop to think, what is somebody afraid of, or what are they motivated by? How do I help them save face and feel better? Are there stories from my life that I can share? Are there other examples that I can share? Believe it or not, can I give them an excuse to hang their hat on, which makes it easier for them to talk about, so that way we can get to the result we need? It's easier to do in business because we look at it as a job. It's harder to do with our family because we're so emotionally attached to the situation. So I'm certainly not recommending that people become emotionally detached to their family, but can we take half a step back to take that goal-focused, goal-oriented approach, put the emotions aside for a second, and approach it that way?
Interesting.
So there are a handful of lessons from interrogation that I honestly believe have changed my life and how I communicate with everybody. And one of them is the concept of letting other people feel in control of a conversation. The feeling of being in control is associated with power and safety. If somebody feels like they can't be in control, they're going to fight for that control. So if somebody doesn't have to fight me for control of the conversation, by definition, I have it, because now I can be patient and I can nudge and guide and kind of steer this conversation anywhere I need it to go over time. So if I have the typical 1-hour business meeting, I don't need to secure my outcome in the first 3 minutes, go home and brag to my friends how fast I got it. When we used to teach interrogations, we would tell people you don't get cool points for fast confessions, you get cool points for full confessions. If you got a confession in 10 minutes, you probably left a bunch of stuff on the board, and that's on you. If I get the outcome from this business meeting I wanted at the 58-minute mark, I got it. And this was a 60-minute meeting. Yeah. So why am I trying to rush it into the first 3 when I still have 57 minutes on the clock for me to listen and learn and connect with somebody in a way they want to be? And they might have a better idea than I do. So why am I shorting them the opportunity to share that? So for me, the approach of literally coming up with my strategy, but giving them control of the conversation has been something that I've sworn by ever since.
Great answers. Michael Reddington, your new book's been out a little while now. You can see this from a mile away. The Disciplined Listening Method, How a Certified Forensic Interviewer Unlocks Hidden Value in Every Conversation. Great book, full of nuggets and sound bites, just like today's interview. And I can see a million uses for this. So thank you for joining us and spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Michael.